Philanthropist, DeDe McGuire. And our panelist, Executive Director of Clinical Trial Patient Diversity at Merck, Dr. Adrelia Allen. Chief Health Equity Officer and Senior Vice President at the American Medical Association, Dr. Aletha Maybank. Chief Purpose Officer for Headspace, Associate Professor of Psychiatry at the University of Connecticut and Adjunct Professor at the University of North Carolina Gillings School of Global Public Health, Dr. Wizdom Powell. And Senior Fellow and Lecturer at the Yale School of Public Health and the Faculty Director of InnovateHealth, Yale, Kaakpema, Yelpaala.
Clap it up, everybody. Clap it up for our panelists. Hi, I'm DeDe McGuire, host of DeDe in the Morning, heard locally right here on my KMEZ here in New Orleans. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for joining us today to discuss a topic that is so important to our community. And I believe you guys are going to understand this as well. We wanted to begin our conversation first with a brief video. Take a look at this.
70% of clinical trial participants are white, and that's not reflective of our actual population. If we aren't able to get the clinical trial demographic breakdown to look more like the global actual world breakdown, we will not have medications that meet the needs of everyone.
Wow, powerful, just that short video right there, right? Such a great introduction to our discussion about clinical trials and why representation is important. Now, before we jump into things, can you each introduce yourselves, please, and tell everybody your expertise, please?
Good afternoon. I am Adrelia Allen, and I'm the Executive Director of Clinical Trial Patient Diversity at Merck. And it is my job to ensure that the clinical trials that are conducted at Merck have a representation by race, ethnicity, gender, sex, and age. Glad to be here.
Love that, love that. Next up.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Aletha Maybank. I am a Senior Vice President and Chief Health Equity Officer at the AMA, at the American Medical Association. What that means and what the work that I've done is really worked on the behalf of our people, our community, really focused on racial justice, health justice, understanding that we have not had the opportunities, resources, we have power, but sometimes the conditions in order for us to achieve the health that we all deserve and have the right to. And so my work is really focused on creating that across the country.
Love that. Next up.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Wizdom Powell. I'm the Chief Purpose Officer at Headspace, but also a tenured professor of psychiatry at the University of Connecticut. And my work focuses primarily on helping populations and communities and systems better understand the needs of Black folk, particularly as we think about things like medical mistrust, which we're going to get into in a moment, but thinking about what we need to do to build systems that rise up to meet our people where they are.
I love that.
Good afternoon. My name is Kaakpema, Yelpaala. Everyone calls me KP. I'm a Senior Fellow and Faculty Director of Health Innovation at the Yale School of Public Health. In terms of background, I'm an entrepreneur. I've started health technology companies both in the US and sub-Saharan Africa, and I'm really focused on how the innovations that we hear about in healthcare support our communities.
Okay, so let's get started. Right now, I'm going to ask you, Adrelia, can you explain to everybody what a clinical trial is and why it's so important for us and in our community?
Yes, so very foundational, great question. A clinical trial is the research that is conducted in humans to ensure that we understand how that new drug works in our bodies. And it includes 4 phases. We begin with healthy volunteers, a small number, and as we continue to conduct research, we're gathering data to understand the risk and the benefits to make sure that we're bringing a safe and efficacious drug to the market. And why clinical trial diversity is so important is because the data that is generated in those clinical trials, that's how we know what the dose will be, How will it impact your kidneys? How will it impact your liver, your heart? So if there are any adjustments that need to be made, it's done in a closed, controlled environment. And we all know that we're different. Everyone is different by race, ethnicity, age, and we need to be able to make sure those differences are accounted for in the clinical trial. So if the patients that have the disease for that medication are not included in the clinical trial, what do you think happens once that drug becomes available on the market and you take it? There are drug interactions that could happen. And so what we do know in 2020, the FDA identified that the majority of the patients in clinical trial were white. 75% were white patients. However, we know, just like I know in my family, we have a lot of comorbid diseases. My family members are taking those medications that were only tested in patients that did not look like my family. And so that's why it's important that we're included in clinical trials so that we'll know how those drugs will impact our Black community. It's not a one-size-fits-all, and so we have to be present in those clinical trials to make sure that we are represented in the data.
I love that. Clap it up for that, everybody, because that's very, very important. It really is. The panelists, anybody else would like to expound on that a little bit and explain why that's important, or are you guys okay with that? You're okay with that. Let's talk a little bit more about this. When we talk about 80% of Black women, listen to this, a study said that while more than 80% of Black women with breast cancer would consider joining a clinical trial if they had known about one. That's the thing, if they had known about one, right? This tells me that if more people in our communities knew about clinical trials and were offered the opportunity to participate, we would, right? So let's talk about that. The barriers, such as a lack of awareness. Do you guys still believe, anybody want to expound on that? Do you believe that still persists in our community?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I'm also a pediatrician and I'm a physician as well, a preventive medicine doctor. And, you know, and I'm going to let Dr. Wizdom and Dr. Powell really speak to the trust issue. But oftentimes what we're finding with a lot of our institutions who we go with, our doctors, and we've heard this in the media, we do go to trust first, right? The lack of trust that we have as a community. Definitely true. We've heard a lot of shift in talking about now kind of the lack of trustworthiness on the part of our institutions. We don't go to institutions because we don't trust them and they haven't done things to support us having trust for them. And I think those are absolutely critical and important. But it's not sufficient enough, to your point of what you're just mentioning, is that if you don't ask people questions about the really why they're not going, we're not really going to know. What we were finding in the data, and a lot of folks will go to the United States Public Health Service study on syphilis that was done in Tuskegee. Many folks have heard of that, but oftentimes that's not the reason why people are not choosing to do and participate in a clinical study.
What are you hearing?
It's oftentimes things related to, one, they are not getting the information. I'm a physician. We were not trained, especially in my generation, on how to have those conversations about clinical trials. To have the conversations about clinical trials, why they're important as far as taking care of our health as a community and a society. That's not part of your visit. I don't know, have any of you, gone to your visit? And maybe some of you have, but most of you, I imagine, have not gone to a doctor's visit and had that conversation. Number two, time. Clinical trials are time, and it takes some time to participate. But what we're finding is that also a lot of the clinical trials are happening in urban communities, urban settings, cities where they have, a lot of the capability per se to do these trials. When you go into more rural spaces in this country, the trials don't even exist as much, and folks aren't exposed to them. So it's not that we don't even want to participate, we actually do. And Morehouse School of Medicine, a couple years ago, they have a colorectal cancer clinical trial that they've been working on. And Morehouse School of Medicine, for those who don't know, is a historically Black medical school. They found when they went to sign folks up, they had over 70% interest in signing up for the clinical trial. So it could be the brand and the name of Morehouse and the history of being a historically Black school, but it wasn't just an issue of mistrust. the information is not getting to our communities in the way that it needs to.
And so let's talk about that. Why isn't the information getting to us?
So I want to first debunk a couple of myths here. I mean, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie warned us of the dangers of a single story. And we've been telling a lot of single stories about why medical mistrust exists in our community. First of all, medical mistrust, from all the research I've done over more than 15 years, is not an attitudinal barrier. It is something that is produced that thickens and thins as people interact and transact with systems. Medical mistrust is about what happened to you as you were walking through your community and being followed by police. It's what happens to you when you show up at a doctor's office and they ask you, are you insured, before they even ask you your name. It is those kinds of wear and tear, we call them, like sort of this allostatic load, you know, that builds up the cumulative experiences with systems that push people back. So I want to debunk that myth that black folk are mistrustful. And in fact, if we look at the data nationally, most Americans are mistrustful. This is not a black problem. COVID-19 and the anti-vax sentiment that we all ran up against should tell us enough that it's not about the skin we're in. It's about the conditions, the systems, the processes of care that fail to speak to our wounds. So I think that when we talk about what the problem is, it's not a knowledge gap. Our folk are smart. They have been seeking bodily autonomy for generations, since they were on southern slave plantations. They understand what they need. It's the fact that systems don't slow down to go fast. Clinical trials have to build in an opportunity for people to be at the table from the front door. You can't build something and then expect people to react to it and expect them to trust it.
Well, why aren't we being considered then, right? Would that be from the doctor? Would that be, you know what I mean,
well,
in terms of being with that?
It's first the corporatization of medicine.
Okay.
It's also the fact that the same implicit biases that we all hold occupy our systems. There have been studies on cardiac catheterization among men that show that when black folk go in with the same symptoms, they're often not given the same medical advice or treatment opportunities. That is not an attitudinal barrier. That is systems failing patients over and over again. So when people say, I don't trust, this is a rational response, evolutionary adaptation to threat. When you're threatened, you move back, and that's smart. So I think systems have to recognize that patients have lived experience, and that should be treated as subject matter expertise.
Okay, KP, what were you getting ready to say? I know you over there. He's ready to say something.
No, I mean, this is, that's very real talk. So look, I think what underlies this as well is the nature of our relationship with the healthcare system. So primary healthcare in the US has broken down. Because if you think about it, if you want to have a conversation with a doctor about a clinical trial, that really should be anchored on a longitudinal relationship with your provider, where it shouldn't be ideally when you're in crisis that now you're having a conversation about a trial. It should be that you've been with that physician for some time and they know your risks, they know your health profile, and over time, not only do you have the trust, but they know what trials will be relevant. But because we have a broken relationship with primary health care, and I have to say this as a public health person, we don't even have the foundational relationships established in the healthcare system, and particularly for us.
Okay, so KP, you wanted to say something.
Just one little thing, and I wanted to add on that what KP is saying. You know, when you're talking about a clinical trial, the time to learn about a clinical trial is not at the time of diagnosis. You're at a critical point in your medical journey, and you're so focused on what the doctor just told you the disease is, the diagnosis, you can't even consume what it is that you need to do to help yourself. So learning about a clinical trial, let's take the opportunity now to begin to learn where they are, who's conducting clinical research in my community. Have you had that conversation with your doctor so that you know what to do and educate yourself, so when you or your family member are at that crossroads, you already know who, where, and when to do, and you can act, versus now being taken over by the diagnosis and now trying to learn about a clinical trial.
Okay, I'm listening to that, and I hear that, and that's proactive. When you say that and not waiting for it to happen, would that mean then when I want to become, I say I want to be a part of this clinical trial, is it something that maybe has gone on in my family? Is that what I should look into? Like how, or do I go into my doctor and say, hey, I want you to put me down for the next clinical trial of anything?
No, I think you take the proactive approach. We have a legacy of advocating for ourselves, but for whatever reason, when it comes to our health, the atrocities that have happened, we don't step up and really be forceful with, if the doctor is not giving me the information that I need, perhaps I need to look for another doctor. You should have that relationship where you can ask your doctor, I'm having these problems, or you've given me these diagnoses. Is there a clinical trial that can support me and help me where I am?
But I would also, I agree, and as a physician, that the reality is, though, there are going to be a lot of doctors who just aren't there yet, right, and don't have the information. And this is where I think even an opportunity, even at a place like where we all are sitting right now, you know, and really kudos to Alfonso, David, and having GBEV really focus on the future of health, because this is the future of health. How well we are engaged, how well we utilize our collective power to get the information that we need to have so that we can be part of the system, because this is all of our right. And I don't think, and I'm a physician at the American Medical Association, and I'm very clear that we cannot wait for other people and the people who have power, and when I say power, I'm talking about the financial power and the political power. We can't wait for that. There's too much at risk right now, too much. And so we need to use these opportunities to have spaces where NIH, FDA, who has now been held accountable, this was held earlier, that the federal government, the administration has actually held the agencies accountable to having racial equity plans for every single thing that they do and making them public. So we need to have spaces where NIH, FDA can come here, you know, and share the information they have, but also have a place where can clinical trials be shared here? What's going on? What's the information? We can get information about beauty products. Let's get information about clinical trials.
I was going to say that, you know, clap it up for that, because that is so true, right? And this is the thing. This place should have been packed out right now. Right now, what we're talking about, we all went through, when we think about COVID and how it hit us, and a lot of folks, I don't know if I want to take this vaccine, and I don't know about this. We're looking up right now, folks can't even hardly get what they need for their, you know, for diabetes right now, because folks want to lose weight on it. You don't even know what you're taking. I keep saying that about some of these folks. Didn't want to take the vaccine, but they want to take Wegovy or whatever it's called, or Wegovy and this and that to lose weight. This place should have been packed after what we just came up out of, right? Where we should have came in here and got all that information. And this is unfortunate, but every seat in here should have been filled so that you know what's going on with your bodies and what's happening with your families. And that's what we're not paying attention to. Before we go, because we're running out of time, I want everyone to take a moment real quick to tell me about this. In closing, let's talk about this question. Looking ahead, what do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities for increasing diversity in clinical trials?
I think we have a huge opportunity now to really put into practice what we've been saying a lot in medicine and public health, meeting people where they are. And meeting people where they are isn't just about a geographic location. It's meeting people where they are in terms of their values, their cultural norms and beliefs. And for the past 20 years, I've been doing a lot of work in community with black men, going to barbershops in the 1990s saying, bruh, before you get that haircut, let me talk to you about your health. Meeting people in the spaces and places where they feel empowered and where they feel like they have a sense of community is so important. And I think that the opportunity right now, if we seize it, especially we're in the midst of an election, you should be talking to your elected officials about their positionality. What is your position on public health? What is your position on preventive care? Because I think that if we ask those tough questions of the people that we are both paying to put into the office at this moment, then we would get some results. We are the people. There is no cavalry coming. If we want the systems to change, we have to be at the forefront of those systems.
I love that. Love that.
I just want to say also, we need more information about what the benefits are of having representation in trials. So just short anecdote, in the early 2000s, there was something called the African American Heart Failure Study. It was basically the first study that was highly inclusive, looking at how congestive heart failure impacts our communities. From that study, what we came to learn is for black folks, we tend to have hypertension connected with congestive heart failure. Those two things go hand in hand. This study led to the creation of treatment that could do those two things with one drug, could handle hypertension and congestive heart failure. That is an example of a drug being tailored specifically to how we as black folks experience a condition. That's the benefit. I don't hear enough about what can we gain by being a part of these trials.
I love that. Anyone else?
I think just build, and really quickly, I agree with everything that's been said. It's an asset-based approach. Like, what are our strengths? How are we going to build on our strengths? What we already know. I'm tired of hearing who we aren't, what's worse with us, what we haven't done. There's a lot we have done in order to stay here to this day for over 400 years. We can do this, and we can do this and figure this out together. That is what we need at this moment, the collective opportunity, and to really use our power in that way for health.
Well, you know, before we end, I know you wanted something else. Go ahead. Say one more.
Go ahead. You go ahead.
Before we end this, one of the things I was going to say to everyone who is out here right now, who's watched, who heard our voices, one of the great things I think that we all can do is when we go back home, if there's a family member that you know is suffering from something or an illness or something like that, maybe you should ask them to get involved in one of these clinical trials. I have a brother who is schizoaffective, and I told him, I said, they could use you. The way he's able to talk about his illness and the things, I said, you need to get into one of those trials to help other people so that they're not dealing with it the way you are. So if you have a family member that's dealing with something, maybe you're not. Maybe it's a friend. Tell them about it. Tell them to get involved in one of these clinical trials. We need that. You can hear this now. Everybody understands that. Real quick, panel, can you let everybody know how they can follow you and how they can find you? If they want to, have questions, let them know. And you can leave with one last,
And just my last thing for what we can do, I did mention about advocating, and as the person representing pharma, the pharmaceutical industry, we're working very hard to work together as a collective group to really engage communities and bring clinical trials closer to patients, and working with different organizations. We're working with the 4 historically Black medical schools to build infrastructure at these institutions to make sure they're already the trusted voices in those communities, so we have to help them to be able to serve those patients. So again, let's advocate, go back to your community, find out who is conducting clinical research in your city, and to ask your doctor about a clinical trial.
Panelists, real quick, before we go, let them know, is there a way to reach you if you have a website, if you're online, on social? Let's go, real quick.
LinkedIn.
Yes, LinkedIn, Instagram, all the ones.
All the ones. How do we find you? Give them your name. And
Dr. Dr. Aletha, Aletha, Maybank, Maybank.
And you can find me on LinkedIn at Wizdom, P-W-I-Z-D-O-M, because my mom was fancy, and on IG at Wisdomisms, and also on Facebook at Wisdomisms.
You can find me on LinkedIn. I've got a long name, but if you just pull it from the program, you throw that in, you'll track me.
All right, everybody. Thank you to our panelists for being here today to shed light on the importance of clinical trials. For those interested in learning more about diversity and inclusion in clinical trials, visit merckclinicaltrials.com/talk trials. The QR code on the postcard you received, you can take that and everything else. But again, you guys, clap it up one more time for our panelists. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being here. I'm DeDe McGuire, host of DeDe in the Morning. You can hear us right here in New Orleans on my KMEZ. Thank you. And nationally.